3 seconds. That's all that was left. Not 3 minutes, not 3 hours, 3 seconds before the end of everything. Heaven was silent. The kind of silence that happens when something irreversible is about to happen. 7 angels stood ready, each one holding something that could break the world in a single moment. No hesitation, no doubt, no emotion, just obedience. Because when heaven decides, it does not change its mind. But then, something happened that was never supposed to happen. One angel moved, not fast, not dramatic, just one step forward. And in that single step, he interrupted the end of the world. Now think about that. Who has the authority to interrupt judgment? Who can step in front of heaven itself and say, wait? Because this angel didn't shout. He didn't fight. He simply stood there and everything stopped. The trumpets didn't sound. The fire didn't fall. The destruction didn't begin. Time itself felt like it paused, waiting for one decision. And here's the part nobody talks about. It wasn't because humanity deserved more time. No, something changed. Up there, something heaven saw at the last second that made one angel step forward and hold back the apocalypse itself. So now the question becomes, what did he see? That was worth stopping the end of the world. And even deeper, what if that moment is the reason you're still alive right now? What if history didn't continue because it was supposed to, but because someone in heaven refused to let it end? There are moments in history that feel heavy, wars, disasters, days when everything seems like it's falling apart. But none of those moments, none compare to what was happening in heaven at that time. Because this wasn't chaos, this was order, perfect, terrifying, divine order. Everything had already been decided. Picture this. Heaven not as noise and music, but as structure. Endless light stretching across eternity. Angels moving with precision, each one knowing exactly where to be, exactly what to do. No confusion, no delay, no second guessing. Because when heaven moves, it moves with purpose. And on that day, heaven was preparing to end the world. Not out of anger the way humans understand it, but justice. The kind of justice that doesn't shake, doesn't bend, doesn't reconsider. The kind that says, enough. Far beyond human sight, beyond the sky, beyond the stars, 7 angels stood in position, not ordinary angels. These were beings of terrifying authority. Their presence alone could make entire nations collapse if fully revealed. Each one held something in their hands, not weapons like swords, something worse, trumpets. Now pause and think for a second. A trumpet doesn't look dangerous. It doesn't look like something that could destroy anything. But in this moment, each trumpet was a signal, a command, a release. The moment one of them sounded, something would be unleashed on the earth that could not be taken back. Not paused, not reversed, unleashed, and the angels knew it. They weren't confused about their role. They weren't questioning what would happen. They understood exactly what those trumpets carried, and still, they stood ready. Now here's what makes this moment even heavier. There was no resistance in heaven. No angel stepped out of line. No one questioned the command. No one whispered, "Are we sure?" Because in heaven, obedience isn't forced. It's absolute. But something strange was happening, something subtle, something almost unnoticeable. If you were there, if you could somehow stand among them, you would feel it immediately. A pressure, not fear, not doubt, but something different, even though nothing had gone wrong. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because everything was ready. The command had already gone out. The angels were already in position. The moment had already begun. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been so close to making a decision that you could feel your whole life about to change? That moment where everything is lined up and all that's left is action? That's where heaven was, right there, at the edge. And then, something no one expected happened. Not a rebellion, not a mistake. Something far more unsettling. One of the angels, not one of the 7, Not one holding a trumpet, another one. He moved, and the moment he moved, everything changed. But here's the terrifying part. He didn't move like someone confused. He didn't move like someone afraid. He moved like someone who knew exactly what he was doing and exactly what it would cost. Now ask yourself this: what kind of angel steps forward when the end of the world is already in motion? What could possibly be more important than obeying a command from heaven itself? Because whatever that reason was, it was strong enough to make him take that step. And the second he did, all of heaven noticed. There's a kind of silence that feels normal, and then there's a silence that feels like something is about to go wrong. This one? It was the second kind. The 7 angels still stood in position, unmoving, unshaken, unquestioning, trumpets in hand, waiting. But now, they weren't the only ones being watched, because the moment that one angel stepped forward, all of heaven felt it. And just like that, attention shifted, not to the trumpets, not to the command, but to him. Now imagine this: an angel stepping out of place in heaven at a moment like this. That alone should disturb you, because angels don't hesitate, they don't improvise, they don't go off script. Every movement in heaven is intentional and aligned. So when one angel does something unexpected, it doesn't create confusion, it creates alarm. But here's what makes it even more unsettling. He didn't rush, he didn't panic, he didn't look around for permission. He walked forward, slowly, each step, deliberate, measured, like he had already accepted the outcome, whatever it would be. And as he moved, something strange happened. The atmosphere didn't resist him, it didn't push him back, it didn't warn him, it made room. Heaven made room for an interruption. Who is this angel? That's the question every being there was silently asking. Because he wasn't one of the 7, he wasn't standing in position, and yet he walked as if he belonged in that moment more than anyone else. The closer he got, the heavier everything felt. Not dark, not evil, but serious. Like the weight of something ancient was moving with him. And then he stopped, right in front of them, right in front of the moment that was supposed to begin the end. No dramatic gesture, no raised hand, no shout, just presence. Now here's where the tension deepens, because not everyone in heaven was comfortable with this. You could feel it, not rebellion, not disagreement, but pressure, like something was building, something unseen, something waiting to respond. And deep within that silence, a question began to form, unspoken, but heavy. Why are we waiting? Because remember, this moment wasn't random. It was scheduled, prepared, set in motion long before this angel ever took that step. So if everything was already decided, what could possibly override it? And then, finally, the angel did something that made the tension snap even tighter. He lifted his head, not in defiance, not in pride, but in certainty, as if he had seen something no one else had seen, and it changed everything. If you're feeling that tension right now, good, because this is where the mystery begins to open. The silence wasn't normal anymore. It wasn't just heavy, it was wrong. Because in heaven, everything flows from one source, command. Nothing moves without it. And yet, here they were, paused, waiting. But here's the part that should unsettle you. No command had been given to stop. Think about that. The angels with the trumpets weren't told to hold. They weren't told to delay. They weren't told to wait. So why weren't they moving? That question began to spread, not in words, but in awareness. From one angel to another, like a ripple moving through eternity. Because something didn't add up. This wasn't obedience anymore. This was something else. Now imagine standing there, seeing everything ready to happen, knowing it should already be happening, but it's not. Have you ever had a moment like that, where something in your life was supposed to happen? Everything was lined up, ready, inevitable, and then suddenly, it just didn't. That feeling, that tension, that confusion, multiply it by eternity. That's what heaven was experiencing. All eyes, every single one, were now fixed on the angel who stepped forward. Still, he hadn't spoken. Still, he hadn't explained. And yet, he stood there like he carried the weight of a decision no one else could make. Now here's where it gets even more intense. Because one of the 7 angels moved, not forward, not to act, but slightly, just enough to signal something was about to happen. And in that instant, you could feel it. The moment trying to correct itself, trying to snap back into motion, trying to continue what had already been said. Because heaven doesn't stay paused, not like this. But before anything could resume, the angel finally did it. He spoke, not loudly, not with force, but with a calm that didn't match the weight of the moment. And what he said wasn't a command. It was a request. Wait, that was it. One word. That alone broke the order of everything. Because angels don't request. They carry out. They execute. They obey. So when that word left his mouth, it didn't just stop the moment, it changed it. Now the tension wasn't just about what was happening, it was about whether this should even be allowed to happen. Because if a request could override a command, then what does that mean about the structure of heaven? What does that mean about authority, about timing, about destiny? And this is where things become dangerous. Because that one word, wait, carried something deeper than sound. It carried intention, not hesitation, not doubt, but purpose. And suddenly, the question shifted. It was no longer, why has everything stopped? Now it became, what does he know that we don't? Because no angel would risk stepping into that moment unless they had seen something worth risking everything for. And whatever that something was, it was powerful enough to stand in front of judgment itself and ask it to pause. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you needed more time, but you didn't know how to ask for it? Like everything was already moving, already decided, and you were just one step too late? What if someone, somewhere, asked for that time on your behalf? Because that's exactly what this moment feels like. Not interruption, not rebellion, intercession, but intercession for what? For who? That's what we're about to uncover. Everything has been about movement. Angels positioning, heaven preparing, a moment about to unfold. But this is different, because now we're not asking what is happening. We're asking, what did he see? That angel, the one standing in front of judgment itself. He wasn't reacting. He had already seen something. Something that made him step forward when every other angel stayed in line. Now imagine this. You're surrounded by beings who have seen creation itself. Angels who have watched stars being formed, who have witnessed kingdoms rise and fall, who stood through war in heaven and never flinched. And yet, none of them moved. Only him. And here's where the story turns inward. Because what he saw wasn't power, it wasn't destruction, it wasn't even judgment. It was people. Not nations, not crowds, individuals. Lives that hadn't fully unfolded yet. Stories that weren't finished. Moments that hadn't happened. A mother who hadn't met her child yet. A man, one decision away from changing everything. Someone on the edge of giving up, who hadn't been reached yet. Lives hanging in the balance, right at the edge of being cut short. And in that instant, he saw something heaven had already accounted for, but not in the way he saw it. Because heaven sees completion, but he saw process. He saw the in-between, the struggle, the almost, the not yet. And something about that moved him. Now let's make this real for a second. Have you ever been in a place where you weren't who you used to be, but you weren't who you were meant to become yet? That uncomfortable space where everything feels unfinished? That's what he saw. Millions of lives in that exact space. Not perfect, not ready, not complete, but not beyond hope either. And in that moment, something inside him refused to let the story end there. Because ending it there would mean cutting off every unfinished story, every redemption that hadn't happened yet, every breakthrough that was one step away. Now here's where it gets even deeper, because this wasn't just emotion, this was understanding. He understood something that wasn't being ignored, but wasn't being felt. The weight of becoming. And that weight was enough to make him step forward. Because to him, those unfinished stories were worth the risk. Now let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. What if your life is one of those unfinished stories he saw? What if right now, you're in the middle of something that hasn't made sense yet, something that feels incomplete, something that feels like it's falling apart, and the only reason it hasn't ended is because someone saw potential in it before it was fully formed? That's the weight of this moment, because now this isn't just about an angel anymore. It's about why time continued. But here's the tension that still hasn't been resolved. Just because he saw something doesn't mean heaven will accept it, and that leads us to the moment where everything could break. Up to this point, everything still felt possible. A pause, a request, a reason. But now we come face to face with something that doesn't bend. The seals. You've heard about them before, but most people don't understand what they really represent. These weren't just symbols. They weren't decorations in prophecy. They were finality. Each seal, once opened, didn't just release an event, it confirmed that what was coming could not be undone. And by the time this moment was happening, those seals, they had already been opened. Let that sink in. This wasn't the beginning of judgment. It was already in motion, already decided, already irreversible. Which means what that angel was doing wasn't just bold, it was impossible. Because you don't pause something that has already been released. You don't interrupt something that has already begun. You don't step into a moment that has already been sealed by heaven and ask it to wait. And yet, that's exactly what was happening. Now imagine the tension in that space. The 7 angels still stood there, trumpets in hand, ready. But now they weren't just waiting, they were restrained. Not by chains, not by force, but by something unseen. Something that didn't come from them and didn't come from a new command. And this is where it becomes unsettling, because the structure of heaven was being tested. Not broken, not destroyed, tested. Can something already set in motion be delayed? Can something already sealed be held back? And suddenly, this wasn't just about an angel anymore. This was about whether what he did would be allowed. Because let's be real for a second. What happens when you step into something bigger than you and ask it to change? What happens when you go against the flow of something already decided? There's always a cost. And he knew that. He knew that standing there, in that position, holding back something already released, could come with consequences he couldn't escape. But he didn't move. Not one step back. Not one sign of regret. Why? Because now it wasn't just about what he saw, it was about what he believed, and what he believed was that even something sealed might still have a moment before it fully unfolds. Delaying something this massive, this final, this inevitable, that creates pressure, not outside, inside. Inside the order of heaven, inside the structure that holds everything together. And the weight of that delay, it didn't disappear, it shifted, and it landed on one being, him, the angel who stepped forward. You see, when you interrupt something this big, you don't just stop it, you carry it. Every second that passed, every moment the trumpets remained silent, every breath heaven did not release, it all rested on him. Now imagine that for a second. Not just responsibility, but the full weight of what should be happening, pressing down on you, the world waiting to change, judgment waiting to fall, time itself holding its place because of your decision. That's not pressure most beings could handle, and heaven knew it. Now here's where it gets even more intense, because the angel wasn't the only one feeling it. The 7 angels, the ones holding the trumpets, they began to react, not outwardly, not in movement, but internally. You could see it in the way their presence shifted, The way their stillness became heavier. They weren't confused, they weren't questioning, but they were aware. Aware that something was standing in the way of what they were meant to release. And the longer that something remained, the harder it became to hold their position. Now ask yourself this: how long can something stay paused before it demands to continue? Because that's where this moment was heading, toward a breaking point, toward a decision that could no longer be delayed. And right in the center of it stood the angel, still unmoving, still silent, still carrying everything. Now here's the part that hits differently. He wasn't just holding back judgment, he was holding back consequences, because if he failed, if this moment snapped back into motion, everything he delayed would come rushing forward at once, stronger, heavier, unstoppable. And he knew that. So this wasn't just about asking for time anymore. This was about justifying it, proving that the delay meant something, that it wasn't wasted, that it wasn't wrong. And that's a dangerous place to be. Because now the question isn't just, should this continue? Now it becomes, was he right to stop it at all? And that question is what begins to turn pressure into consequence. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever made a decision that bought you time, but then realized that time came with a cost you weren't ready for? That's where he is, holding a moment that cannot last forever, knowing that whatever happens next will define everything. And now heaven is done waiting. The next move will decide it all. Chapter 7, the decision that changed time. There comes a point where a moment can no longer remain a moment. It has to become a decision. And this had reached that point. The weight in heaven had peaked. The silence had gone from heavy to unbearable. The delay had stretched to its absolute limit. Something had to give, and everyone knew it. The 7 angels tightened their grip on the trumpets. Not moving, but ready. The atmosphere no longer felt like it was waiting. It felt like it was about to snap. And at the center of it all, still stood the angel, unmoving, unshaken. But now, you could feel it. The cost had caught up, because holding back something this powerful for this long comes with a price, and he was paying it, not in pain, not in weakness, but in weight. The kind of weight that presses into your very being, the kind that makes even certainty feel heavy. Because now, this wasn't just about what he saw. This was about what he was willing to stand on. And then, it happened. The presence behind everything, the authority that had allowed this pause to exist, responded. Not with anger, not with force, but with something far more final. Permission, but not the kind you expect. Not permission to continue delaying, not permission to step back. Permission to choose. And in that instant, everything shifted. Because now the responsibility wasn't shared. It wasn't spread across heaven. It wasn't held in balance anymore. It was placed fully on him. Let that hit you. He was now the one who would decide whether the moment continues or ends. Not because he broke the system, but because he stepped forward and refused to move. And now, he had to stand on that choice. This is where most beings would break, because it's one thing to interrupt something. It's another thing entirely to be told, all right, now finish what you started. Now ask yourself this: what would you do if the fate of everything rested on your decision? Do you step back and let it happen? Do you trust that what was set in motion was right all along? Or do you stand firm and believe that what you saw, what you felt, what you risked everything for, was worth it? That's where he was. No guidance, no reassurance, just a choice. And in that moment, he closed his eyes. Not out of fear, not out of doubt, but to focus, to return to the one thing that brought him here in the first place. What he saw, those unfinished lives, those moments that hadn't happened yet, those stories that were still in progress. And then he made his decision. He didn't speak. He didn't raise his voice. He simply remained. He chose to stand. And that choice, it changed everything. Because instead of the moment snapping forward, instead of the trumpet sounding, instead of judgment continuing its course, something else happened. Time adjusted, not reversed, not erased, but extended. A shift so subtle, most wouldn't even notice it. But in heaven, it was undeniable. The moment had passed without being completed. And just like that, the inevitable was no longer immediate. Now let that settle in your mind for a second. Something that was already in motion was allowed to wait because one being stood in front of it and refused to move. Now here's the question that should stay with you. If time was extended, then what are you doing with the time you have now? Because according to this moment, time isn't just something that passes. Sometimes it's something that's given.